France, June 1944. A German sentry stands at his post outside a railway junction in occupied Normandy, his breath visible in the pre-dawn chill. He hears nothing, not the footsteps approaching through the darkness, not the metallic click of a weapon being raised, and certainly not the shot that kills him. The sound that reaches his companion, stationed 15 meters away, is barely louder than a hand slapping leather, a dull, muffled thump that could be anything in the night. By the time the second guard turns to investigate, he too is dead, dropped by the same whisper-quiet technology. The railway junction, vital for German reinforcements rushing towards the Normandy beaches, will be in Allied hands within the hour. This is not the work of a knife or a garrote. This is the Welrod, Britain's strangest and most secretive firearm of the Second World War, a weapon so effectively silenced that it rewrote the rules of clandestine warfare. In the shadows of occupied Europe, where a single gunshot could mean discovery, torture, and death for entire resistance networks, the British had created something extraordinary. A pistol that could kill in near total silence, a weapon that turned assassination into a science, and a tool that would become the template for covert firearms for the next 8 decades. This is the story of how Britain's engineers solved an impossible problem and created a weapon that remains classified in some details to this day. The problem facing British intelligence services and the Special Operations Executive in 1942 was brutally simple. How do you kill quietly? The resistance movements operating across occupied Europe needed to eliminate sentries, collaborators, and isolated German personnel without alerting others nearby. A knife required proximity, skill, and physical strength that not all resistance fighters possessed. It was also messy, unreliable, and left the attacker covered in evidence. A garrote demanded even closer contact and carried the same limitations. Standard firearms were completely unsuitable. The crack of a pistol shot in the night would bring every German soldier within 500 meters running. Even a single shot could compromise an entire operation, expose a resistance cell, and lead to mass reprisals against civilians. The existing solutions were inadequate. Suppressors, often incorrectly called silencers, had existed since Hiram Maxim's designs in the early 1900s, but they were cumbersome accessories that screwed onto existing pistols, adding unwieldy length and weight. More critically, they reduced but did not eliminate the sound. A suppressed standard pistol still produced a sharp crack as the bullet broke the sound barrier, still ejected a spent cartridge with a metallic clatter, and still required a mechanism that produced mechanical noise. German sentries were spaced at intervals precisely calculated to provide mutual support, typically between 20 and 50 meters, depending on the terrain and importance of the position. At these distances, even a suppressed conventional pistol would alert nearby guards. The mathematics were unforgiving. A standard .32 automatic pistol produced approximately 150 decibels at the muzzle, roughly equivalent to a jet engine at close range. Even with a basic suppressor, the sound dropped only to perhaps 120 decibels, still comparable to a thunderclap or a chainsaw. The supersonic crack of the bullet added another 130 decibels. At 20 meters, this was still catastrophically loud. What was needed was a weapon that could operate at conversation level, around 60 decibels, or ideally even quieter. This seemed physically impossible with the technology of the early 1940s. The solution emerged from the Inter-Services Research Bureau, the cover name for Station 9, a clandestine research and development facility located at the Frythe, a requisitioned Victorian mansion in Hertfordshire. Here, away from conventional military oversight, a team of engineers led by Major Hugh Reeves approached the problem with first principles thinking. They would not modify an existing pistol. They would design a weapon from scratch with one single purpose: silent killing at close range. The breakthrough was recognizing that almost everything about a conventional firearm had to be reversed. Most pistols prioritized rapid fire, magazine capacity, and range. The Welrod would be manually operated, hold just 6 rounds, and be effective only at arm's length. Most pistols used high-velocity ammunition. The Welrod would use subsonic rounds that never broke the sound barrier, eliminating the supersonic crack entirely. Most suppressors were add-on devices. The Welrod would be built around its suppressor, with the silencing mechanism integrated into the weapon's very structure. The design that emerged looked like nothing else in any arsenal. At just over 300 millimeters long, it resembled a bicycle pump or a section of metal tubing more than a firearm. The suppressor made up roughly 2/3 of this length, a cylinder 200 millimeters long and 32 millimeters in diameter, packed with a series of rubber disc washers separated by metal spacers. When the weapon fired, propellant gases followed the bullet through this labyrinth, expanding into the spaces between the washers, cooling and slowing before they could exit the muzzle. The rubber washers, cut from standard issue gasket material, absorbed energy and muffled sound with each passage. The barrel itself was drilled with a series of ports that bled off gas pressure before the bullet even entered the suppressor, reducing the violence of the discharge. At the rear, a rotating bolt mechanism allowed the shooter to manually chamber each round, eliminating the mechanical clatter of automatic operation. The grip was a simple, skeletal metal frame wrapped in knurled rubber, designed to be held in one hand whilst the other worked the bolt. The magazine, a single stack affair holding 6 rounds, fed .32 ACP ammunition, specially loaded to subsonic velocities. Standard .32 ACP rounds travelled at approximately 290 meters per second, well above the speed of sound at 343 meters per second. The Welrod's ammunition was loaded to just 250 meters per second, ensuring the bullet itself made minimal noise. This reduced the effective range dramatically. Accuracy beyond 10 meters was poor, but for the weapon's intended purpose, this was irrelevant. The target would be close enough to touch. Manufacturing took place at several locations, with final assembly conducted at Station 9 under conditions of extraordinary secrecy. The suppressor components were machined at small engineering firms, told they were producing motorcycle parts. The receivers were manufactured separately. The rubber washers were cut from standard gasket material by workers who had no idea of their ultimate purpose. Only at the Fryth were the components brought together, tested, and issued. Production numbers remain uncertain. The very existence of the weapon was classified, and production records were either destroyed or remained sealed. Conservative estimates suggest perhaps 2,800 were manufactured between 1943 and 1945, though some researchers believe the figure may have been higher. The Welrod entered service with the Special Operations Executive in late 1942 and early 1943, distributed to resistance networks across occupied Europe and to British commandos operating behind enemy lines. SOE training schools taught a specific methodology: approach to within 2 meters, aim for the head or upper chest, fire once, work the bolt, fire again if necessary. The weapon's report, described by those who heard it as similar to a book being dropped on a table or a car door closing gently, was quiet enough that even in silent surroundings, a person 15 meters away might not recognize it as a gunshot. Operational use is difficult to document precisely because successful use left no witnesses and generated no reports. The weapon's very purpose was to kill silently and disappear. However, fragments of information survive in declassified SOE files and post-war debriefings. French resistance networks used the Welrod to eliminate Gestapo informers and milice collaborators in occupied cities, where even a suppressed conventional pistol would have been catastrophically loud in narrow streets and apartment buildings. Danish resistance fighters employed it during the suppression of High Posts, the Hilfspolizei auxiliary police force that collaborated with German occupation authorities. In the Netherlands, Welrods were used during targeted assassinations of German officials and Dutch collaborators, operations that required absolute silence to avoid massive reprisals. British special forces carried the weapon during raids on occupied Norway and during clandestine operations in the Balkans. One partially documented incident involves the assassination of a German officer at a railway station in Belgium, where the shooter fired twice at close range in a crowded booking hall and simply walked away in the confusion, the sound lost amongst the general noise of the station. The psychological impact on German forces and collaborators was considerable. The knowledge that one could be killed without warning, without sound, and without any chance for nearby allies to respond created a pervasive paranoia. Sentries became nervous. Collaborators requested transfers to less exposed positions. German counterintelligence devoted considerable resources to identifying the weapon and its users, though how much they learned remains unclear. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The Germans had nothing comparable. Their Gestapo and SS units used suppressed Walther pistols fitted with screw-on suppressors, but these were conventional semi-automatic weapons with add-on devices that reduced rather than eliminated sound. They remained far louder than the Welrod, typically producing sound levels around 110 to 115 decibels, even when suppressed, still comparable to a chainsaw or a rock concert. The supersonic crack of standard ammunition undermined whatever noise reduction the suppressor provided. German suppressed weapons were also mechanically complex, prone to malfunction, and difficult to maintain in field conditions. The Welrod's simplicity, a manually operated bolt, minimal moving parts, and a suppressor requiring only rubber washers that could be cut from any gasket material, made it extraordinarily reliable and easy to maintain. The Americans developed their own suppressed weapons, most notably the high-standard HDM pistol, a .22 caliber weapon with an integrated suppressor. Whilst the HDM was similarly quiet, the .22 round lacked stopping power, making multiple shots frequently necessary and increasing the risk of discovery. The Welrod's .32 ACP round, whilst not particularly powerful by conventional standards, was entirely adequate for headshots at conversational distance. The Soviets had experimented with suppressed weapons as early as the 1930s, including the Bramit device that could be fitted to various pistols and the purpose-built NRS-2 knife pistol combination. However, Soviet designs generally prioritized partisan warfare applications rather than the precise assassination missions for which the Welrod was intended. The closest parallel to the Welrod emerged decades later with the development of the KGB's PSS silent pistol in the 1980s, which used captive piston ammunition to eliminate both muzzle blast and mechanical noise. A different approach, but similar philosophy. What made the Welrod unique was the integration of simplicity, reliability, and genuine near silence in a package that could be manufactured with 1940s technology and maintained under field conditions by non-expert users. It achieved sound levels estimated at 73 decibels at the muzzle, quieter than a vacuum cleaner, comparable to a normal conversation, through purely mechanical means, requiring no special ammunition beyond subsonic loading. This represented a genuine technological achievement that other nations took decades to match. The actual impact of the Welrod is impossible to quantify with precision. How many German sentries died without their companions hearing the shot? How many collaborators were eliminated in occupied cities without alerting nearby patrols? The weapon's very effectiveness ensured its use left minimal documentation. What can be stated with confidence is that it provided Allied forces and resistance networks with a capability they had previously lacked: the ability to kill at close range with minimal risk of acoustic detection. This capability supported clandestine operations that conventional weapons would have rendered impossible. The psychological impact may have exceeded the material effect. The knowledge that British forces possessed genuinely silent firearms created uncertainty and fear amongst occupation forces and collaborators. It complicated German security procedures and forced the deployment of additional personnel to positions that might otherwise have been lightly guarded. The Welrod also established a template for post-war development of suppressed firearms. After 1945, the weapon remained in service with British special forces and intelligence agencies. It saw use during colonial conflicts in Malaya and Kenya during the 1950s, during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and reportedly during various intelligence operations throughout the Cold War. Production continued sporadically into the 1960s, with modified versions chambered in 9mm parabellum manufactured for special forces use. The design philosophy influenced American development of the high-standard HDM, the Ingram Mac-10 with integrated suppressor, and ultimately the modern generation of special operations weapons, like the Heckler and Koch Mark 23. Model 0 SOCOM pistol. The principle of designing the weapon around the suppressor, rather than adding suppression to an existing weapon, became standard practice for clandestine firearms development. Examples of the Welrod can be seen today at the Imperial War Museum in London, the Royal Armouries in Leeds, and in private collections. Many specimens show evidence of field use, worn finishes, replaced washers, and the patina of operational service. The weapon remains subject to Section 5 prohibition under British firearms law, classified alongside other prohibited weapons due to its specifically designed role as an assassination tool. Some technical details remain officially classified 8 decades after its introduction. France, June 1944. A railway junction changes hands without a shot being heard, without an alarm being raised, without the catastrophic firefight that would have resulted from any other weapon. 2 German sentries lie dead, killed by a technology they never understood, manufactured in a requisitioned mansion in Hertfordshire, designed by engineers who thought from first principles rather than conventional wisdom. In the mathematics of silence, the British had found an answer. They had built a weapon that reduced gunfire to a whisper, assassination to a science, and created a tool that would define clandestine warfare for the next 80 years. The Welrod was never the most powerful pistol, never the most accurate, never the most sophisticated. But on a dark night in occupied Europe, when discovery meant death and silence meant survival, it was exactly what was needed, a gun that killed without anyone hearing the shot.